Hello everyone, I'm Ellie. Just to answer a little bit more about some of those litter questions straight away, the way that the litter metric is actually being calculated, we're comparing it to a 4-year baseline from 2014 to 2018, which is before those bans on single-use plastics and plastic bags came into place. So each year we'll compare it back to that baseline and hopefully we'll see a declining trend in the litter along those, through time, sorry. And yeah, so hopefully we can track the way that those bans are interacting. And in response to the microplastics questions on the island, I've actually been involved in a few transects and things doing AusMap surveys, which is going and sieving the sand, and you can count the amount of microplastics that are in the sand there. So people like Reef Check and those kind of things, and I know Tangara Blue and people like that are already collecting that data as well for citizen science. Sorry to steal the mic straight away, but I just wanted to add that as well.
No, I think that's great. And I think I'll just give a quick plug before they start. If you look inside your report card, over where the Blueprint project is at the top, behind this report card sits an incredible amount of technical documents. I know a few people in the room have been involved in reviewing them and will tell you that the couple of 100 pages is a bit of a, it's a hefty read, but there is a lot of information in terms of being data transparent and open about where everything's coming from. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you, should be live on the web now, and it'll take you to the technical documents if you want to know anything more about any of the methods that doesn't get covered today. And so there's 2 documents there. One is a results report, so that'll step you through everything that is in the report card and what are the 2020 report card results. And then the other one that sits there is a methods report. And that methods report is obviously all the methods that feed into the data collection, where our data comes from, who's providing it, and all that. So with that, I thought, we've had some hefty research talks today, and also maybe not always the most positive things. So I guess I'm going to ask the first question with what is probably the good news story out of this report card, or what are you excited, and what do you think is the positive messages that are coming through in the data we're collecting?
Thanks, Bonnie. I think there are, also hi everyone, Technical Officer number 2, Talon, on the estuaries and freshwater, marine. This essentially, as Bonnie mentioned, is your opportunity to hit us with any burning questions you had about our waterways. If we cannot answer them either in our brains or via papers that we have in our hands, we will most certainly try and answer them for you after the show. The first thing, what's good right now, with estuaries, we did see quite a lot of good news stories. We saw all of our estuaries were good for nutrients this year, and we had 3 improvements in our estuaries overall for scores. That was the Gregory, Vines, and Carmilla. It's worth noting that with a report card, though, some of these grade changes are all based on metrics in the environment, and we set these thresholds like, okay, when nutrients cross a certain grade or threshold in the environment, we're going to count that as good versus very good. And those thresholds are sometimes can be broken with very small changes. So those situations happened in the Gregory and Carmilla this year, where we didn't see a huge change in score, but we saw increases from a B, a good score, to a very good score. And those were likely influenced by rainfall as well. So those are a couple small things for us. Basins were largely very, very similar. We saw some increases, so for example, in the Don, pesticides was increased to very good as well. If you would like to know about individual indicators, I can do that, but to not draw on one question for too long, I'll pass it over to Ellie, because we have a number of surprises for you in marine.
Thank you. So one of the best sort of things that we've seen in the marine zone is a continued recovery of the seagrass meadows, particularly after Cyclone Debbie. So obviously that was very destructive, as Johnny mentioned, and seagrass really declined in a direct result of that. But each year in each of our monitored zones, we've seen the scores improve, particularly in the northern zone. It's now gone to a grade of good from last year at moderate. So that's really exciting. It means that the seagrass is coming back quite quickly, and that's really good news for obviously the dugong and turtles, but also for fish, which is really important to all of our recreational fishermen.
Go straight to questions from the audience.
Oh, you mentioned fish. I'm just intrigued where you mentioned no data or insufficient data, in particular in the offshore, well, actually all of that coastline around fish. What is the barrier there for you to be able to collect that data?
So money. Money is money is the barrier.
Well, in also the context of citizen science, or is there a lacking of partnerships as well, or potential partnerships?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work on it at the moment, trying to get that data through citizen science essentially. And so Bon will be doing that'll be a big job for Bon, and working with Annie and various people from the other partnerships as well to try and sort of engage recreational fishermen to try and get that data, and hopefully we can. But hopefully we can fill those grey gaps in the future. Obviously, it would be nice to be able to sort of incorporate that with proper science that's being done by the science institutions. But if all we can do is get citizen science, then that's a really great first step, I think. And fishermen are some of the people that we want to engage with the most, because they're out there quite often and seeing those changes, and they know the good spots to see the fish. So it would be really nice to be able to get that data.
It's also worth noting, I think, you'll see that we do have fish grades for freshwater here, and yeah, it's probably prompting the question. The reason why that doesn't work, for those of you who might not know, in our estuary or marine, and we have data provided to us by DES for our freshwater, and they use something called electrofishing for that area, but that doesn't work as soon as you get salt water into the environment. So it's a little bit more difficult, I think is why it's taken us quite a while. And we acknowledge the magnitude of how much people care about these fish. So when we do introduce this, we want to make sure it's right. So we've been mulling over this, and Annie knows all about this as well for years as a partnership. So we're getting there, and Bonnie can probably speak to this a bit more, but it's just we're kind of building this up with a citizen science program in the future, hopefully. You want to?
No, I think we'll keep going. That's probably a pretty good summary of fish. It's challenging and we're working on it. Alison Jones is here today on behalf of the Rec Fishers as well. So that's they're one of our partners, and something that we'll look towards with the citizen science funding that we have, and working in, when they keep referring to me, they're actually referring to the work we're doing across the Northern 3 partnerships. So that's with Dry Topics Partnership from Townsville, and Annie sitting here is the EO from Townsville Partnership, and then also Wet Tropics. And James, the EO that's just started up there, is actually a fish person. So it's going to be awesome to have him involved across the partnership network and that background and knowledge as well. So yeah, we'll see where we get with that, I guess. Question, I'm going to go duck up the back. It might also be helpful if you just say, where you're from and your name when you ask the question, I guess. Makes us feel a bit more like friends. So I'm going to pass over to Dylan from SRA to ask a question.
Thank you. Hey, I'm looking at these fish scores, right? And am I interpreting right here that our fish in our freshwater areas they're all good or very good ratings, yet the water in the habitat is moderate to poor? Is my interpretation right in that our fish are actually adapting to these environments, and maybe our metrics for water quality aren't actually representative of what the fish are now capable of living in?
That's an excellent question, Dylan, and this is a good opportunity, as we mentioned before, that we address this as a partnership, as a collective. There was a lot of questions, this exact one posed to us about a year ago by folks at SRA and the kangaroo community about, well, we're seeing these really good fish scores in our region. We're also seeing these very poor scores for pesticides and water quality. How do we reconcile those apparent differences? And what we did as a partnership is trying to say that, well, it's a little bit complicated, but they're not actually opposed to each other at all because of the way in which we're measuring fish. So we right now, the scores that we get for our fish grades are abundance of fish. They're not the health of fish, they're not how they're doing necessarily or their adaptation. They're just, are they there and what's there? And then in addition to that, a lot of the pesticides that we see in the region, as we know, pesticide, are doing their job really well at affecting some organisms. But they're not necessarily designed to affect organisms directly or kill organisms like fish. They're designed for smaller pests. They're designed for sometimes vegetation in the waterways. So fish might start to see these effects a little bit differently than straight up killing them in a way. And so I encourage him, we can speak about this afterwards too. We essentially addressed or asked over, I think, 10 experts, fish experts and ecotalk experts across Queensland to try and answer this question, and it is up live on our website. So please go, and there's a full-length description there of exactly why we're getting these fish scores and these pesticides. But we can talk about more about that afterwards as well. Keen to hear your thoughts.
And I'm just going to quickly jump in there and say, involving the technical fish ecologists in this region across the next 12 months is something we're going to do to continue that conversation and continue to answer the knowledge gap there that we have, I think. So, yep. Who's got the next question?
Talon, this one's for you. Sorry, Ellie. I'm Cass. I'm from Reef Catchments. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to know, this is probably going to sound like a silly question, sorry, but you're talking about a lot of the scores improving because we had quite a dry year, and so there wasn't necessarily as much runoff happening. Obviously, nutrients are uptaken by plants, but things like pesticides, do you expect to see worse scores in the future because of their build-up in the environment over the dry season?
That is a great question, and
Is it?
one that I think so. I think it's a great question because it is very pertinent, and one that I probably can't answer fully with I think we'll need a couple experts to answer this in the depth that you're probably looking at. But one thing that I can speak to is complicated, but it'll depend on the half-life of the pesticides that are contributing the most risk. And Carl, I see you nodding, so I'm on the right track here, I think. So what we use to measure our pesticides is something called the pesticide risk metric. So this is something that's used nationally by Australia and the Catchment Loads Monitoring Program at DES. And what it does is rather than take a specific unit of pesticide, it quantifies the risk of each pesticide, so for diuron, and how it might affect an organism that we expect to see in that waterway. And then it takes all those predictions of how it affects an organism and combines it together to get a rating for risk. And so what we can see, if it's a dry year, if those pesticides don't run out, and if their half-life, meaning the time that they take to disintegrate in the environment, is small enough, we might not see that runoff actually happen and that risk being attributed to the waterway. However, for some that might have more half-life, I'm not exactly sure in the individual half-life, that's why I'm saying I can't answer the question fully, that might still run off in the future, but we're seeing what happens. If folks who are nodding would like to contribute something, you let me know. But we're good?
Spot on, Talon. We've got different half-lives of different chemicals, so some can be as little as 60 to 90 days, some 120 days, 180 days, and up to 5 years for the more residual ones. But that's sort of that's the rate that we're seeing decaying.
That makes sense. But if my understanding is we have a couple dry years in a row, obviously the chance of that, goes down because Awesome. Thanks, Carl.
Have we got any other questions from the audience at the moment? I'm going to jump in and ask one because I know Talon, you love to speak, so I'm going to. But you've also, it's been amazing. You've answered the questions really well, and I think it shows how much we care and invested in our basins and the local things that we can change and contribute to. So I'm just going to ask a quick one of Ellie. What are you excited about in the report card? Or the other option, I guess, is we've had a lot of litter, but is there something that you would like to tell us about that's exciting and interesting, or that we're learning from that metric?
So in general, I'm excited about the citizen science stuff. So I've been quite involved with the citizen science things this year, and got to go out with the Reef Check crew and learn how they take their data and that kind of thing. So it was a bit of a, as a self-professed citizen science skeptic, when I first came into the role, it was really important for me, I think, to get that confidence in the data and actually go out and see how it's being collected. And I came away from it thinking it's just awesome, and I want to use as much of it as possible. So we've brought in Reef Check, which has just been awesome, and included 7 new sites for our coral in the Whitsundays and out to Hardy Reef, which is in our offshore zone. And then we've also included a new site from Seagrass Watch at Bowen, which I actually helped collect that data and went out and volunteered for them for the day, and met some of the nice, lovely volunteers that are giving up their time to collect that data. So that was really fun as well. And then, of course, the litter metric, which we've worked really hard to produce, and in particular Tegan in the dry tropics has worked exceptionally hard to get that metric up and running. And so both the dry tropics and us are reporting that this year. and then hopefully wet tropics in the future and the southern partnerships as well. So I think it's a really great step to be able to start moving into those sort of human dimensions, directly affecting our environment, and it's a whole new metric, so it's pretty cool. And we were kind of anticipating it for next year's report card, so to have it in this year is really cool.
I guess that's a good segue for me to ask you to check out the back of your report card for what's coming up in the next year and those exciting things. So not necessarily now, but later if you want to hear a few things that are coming on board next year and, you know, what is the work we've got to do. Space for, oh, we've got another one at the back. Dylan, I'll give you one more, but I might pass to Indus first.
Cheers. I'm Indus, I'm grade 12 senior. I just had a question. We talk about monitoring as a method of getting these early warning signs in our ecosystems. And I see the program's been going for 8 years, so I think you're finding some great information. But what sort of work's being done at the moment to help reduce some of those risks, help improve some of our sites that we're seeing with these, you know, moderate to poor ratings for our ecosystems? Is there any work, any changes in policy which are being implemented as a result of the findings from your partnership?
So to speak to the last bit first, the ongoing challenge for us is sort of how, as a partnership, we can take that next step in actually implementing or influencing policy change, and that's why it's important for us to have people from the Office of the Great Barrier Reef here and talking to the Department of Environment and Science and all levels of government really. And trying to get the message of the partnership out there as much as possible so that we can start using our data, which is only getting longer and longer term data sets, to actually make policy changes. There is a lot of work being done across the whole Great Barrier Reef in this space of water quality and nutrients in particular and water clarity and that kind of thing. The farmers, I know, in our region and right across the Great Barrier Reef are doing a lot of work to manage their pesticide and fertiliser applications in a more sort of thoughtful way of timing it with storms and that kind of thing to reduce the runoff, which is better for them as well. They're able to use it more on their crops rather than losing it into the river. So there's certainly a lot of work being done.
First, great question as well. One thing that, as Ellie mentioned, we struggle with in the partnership for some time is that whole, how do we link ourselves to improving management practice, in a sense. One project that I do want to mention as well and shout out to, because there's a few folks who worked on it in this room, is the Urban Water Stewardship Framework. So Scott and Stephanie and Viv and folks from 3 regional councils have kind of been kind enough to give us their time, sit down in a room and talk about how they're doing with urban water and what steps we can take to improve that. And they've also been kind enough to allow us to speak to their councils in the future, and hopefully we'll see link that to what ways can we improve. As a partnership though, one thing we're trying to do while we're all here in this room, have a photography competition, is we're not policymakers per se. We are a free resource here for you folks, and all our stuff is online now. The new report card scores and the data that we use is available, so hopefully we're trying to allow ourselves as a resource that can be linked to folks doing that management practice. So it's kind of like our role here, but having said that, we would love to do that more. So I encourage you, and we're trying to get into schools more as well, use it in the classrooms. If you can have folks, we crossed over Vines Creek on the way here. That is the biggest estuary change this year for any grade. If you can use us more, please do, and we're trying to.
Also, time for me to pipe up and say the partnership puts out each year a stewardship report or a management response report, however you want to call it. That will be coming out in October, and that really highlights what each of the partners are doing and what we're doing as a whole in the community to improving the grades and that sort of thing. So keep an eye out for that in October. Dylan, did you still have another question? Yeah, let's get a quick one in.
Hey, I'm a little bit sceptical about that citizen science as well, but is there going to be any opportunities for us to trial it onshore and I can go out there and have a look and see how it actually works?
Yeah, I mean, just as the first step, get in touch with me and I can explain all the methods to you and how it's all done, and our process of getting the data from citizens into the report card and how many checks that's going through, and the high-level scientists that are looking over it. But of course, there's so many different organisations that you can go out and volunteer for and see for yourself. And a lot of them you can just go out for a day and help out just for that day. You don't have to sign on to go out all the time. But yeah, again, get in touch with me and I can connect you to whoever or whatever sort of environmental stuff you're most interested in, if it's coral or seagrass or fish or water quality or whatever. But there's a lot of space for new volunteers all the time.
So you're going to do the program on shore, so like it's all based off, like off the shore at the moment, like around reefs and all of that. We're going to do anything in freshwater.
Oh, can I jump in quickly? Because
Yeah,
I was just thinking of something as that popped up. I think maybe you're asking around citizen science and water quality potentially. Yeah, so I think that's been something that the partnership's been interested in for a while. At the moment, the citizen science is the seagrass, reef check, all those sorts of things. But Serena Landcare, they're not here today, but they're an apology because they have a lot on. But they're also running a citizen science water quality program at the moment, getting people involved in their catchment. So we're going to watch how that goes and then look for the options that can come out of that, or if there's something we can do in the future. The problem with citizen science, and I think there's a few people in the room that can attest to that, is it's a lot of work to engage volunteers, get them along to your events, and then also the big hurdle we have in the report card, and why it's taken us a while to get the litter metric and other metrics in, is you've got to have a lot of baseline data. So another example of that would be the Southern Inshore program. We've been collecting data in the Southern Inshore region for, I think it's about 4 years now, and we need those 5 years of baseline data to compare stuff against before we're happy to put it in the report card. So there's a couple of hurdles with citizen science, but I think it is a really powerful way, and I sit in that skeptic camp. Coming from an academic background, I used to always think, yeah, maybe, you know, if you give volunteers clipboards, it's not the most robust process, but this job has really changed my mind in that, in terms of the data that can come out of it, and especially in this region. I know Julie talked about funding and things before, and until we attract like lots more funding to answer all these questions, then getting our community involved in collecting data is a really powerful way to do that. So I'm not sure we've totally answered your question, but there's a bit more information.
I also, Viv's just reminded me, one sort of thing that I've learnt while I'm up here is how passionate the community is about getting involved, even when they're not environmental scientists whatsoever. So Viv actually got in touch with me late last year about the Clairview community and how interested they are in the seagrass and the dugong down there. So we've just sort of kick-started a small citizen science project there, where the citizens are just recording the dugong that they're seeing around the place, and it's as much about engagement as it is data collection, I think, and getting those people to sort of notice what's going on in the environment and take ownership over the dugong and over the environment in their local area. And so if there's a sort of a chance that people are interested, then we can always start new citizen science projects. If you can't see the one that you want to join, then yeah, get in touch with people like us and we can work with you. The whole point of it is a partnership, and we can kickstart some of those things.
I'm just going to jump in as a realist and say there's only so many hours in the day as well, though. And I guess everyone's sick of me saying this, but we're a small team. So as a small team, we're happy to connect you to those opportunities that Ellie was talking about. And
I'll do it.
Yeah. We will investigate where we can kick things off and get them started, but it's really at the moment about collaborating with the long-term projects like Hades, the Australian Marine Debris Database, and all these other things, and making those synergies so we're not really sitting here in our own little bubble and reinventing the wheel. So with that, I guess if there's any burning questions, if you want to raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we might just wrap up the tech Q&A.
Just a comment on event monitoring. This region's got a really strong history in event monitoring. 20 years ago, in this region they started flood monitoring, and it was the first flood monitoring in the state, and it found a lot of the issues with water quality, and that was the genesis of what is now the statewide event monitoring program. So there's a strong history of communities getting out of monitoring in this part of the world.
That's beautiful to hear, Carl, and thanks so much for your local context and knowledge. I think that's the other thing we don't have. You don't really have a local standing up here as part of the team at the moment, so you do lack a bit of historical context. I haven't said to Alicia I was going to do this, but I was wondering just to say thank you so much Alicia's worked as a technical officer for the partnership before Ellie was involved. She was off on maternity leave and has since decided that she won't be coming back after the partnership, but she's just asked me to pass on to everyone how much she enjoyed working with the partnership and all that sort of stuff. And I just wanted to say it publicly now, because as well as recognising these guys, because the report card is 7 years worth of data at this point in time, and there's been a lot of people that sit behind the scenes and do a lot of hard work. I think I've talked to other past technical officers, not Alicia, I'm not going to dob her in, but they have told me it can often be a bit of a slog, and sometimes unforgiving around those periods where it's leading into the technical working reviews and all the scientific reviews. So just a big shout out. Without these guys and all the work they've been doing, the report card wouldn't be a thing that it is. So we'll finish the tech session with a huge shout out to the people that do the tech work and on the ground, and wrap it up there and hand back over to Julie.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Talon. And thank you for your questions. I was actually, I had a go at Alicia because she didn't bring the baby along. So Charlie at least came, outside apparently, not good enough. Charlie, at least when she was on maternity leave, she came along to a launch with the baby, so at least we all got to see the baby. So when you get your photograph taken outside, we might bring the baby along as well for the photograph. I just wanted to say thank you very much to all the speakers this morning. I think it's been really quite interesting to sort of have the different spaces that we've actually looked at from both the marine and both speakers, but about what comes off land and what actually happens in the ocean. I think it's been really useful to do that. I think the comment made about what Talon and Ellie do behind the scenes is extraordinary, because there's that huge data that comes in, and it's really is a case of, heads down, bums up, because the amount of work that goes into that over those sort of short period of time to pull all the data together and to get you the results is really quite extraordinary. So hats off to you guys, and hats off to the technical working group and all those who are behind the scenes. Thank you very much to the partners. Thank you all for coming along this morning, but thank you to the partners for your ongoing commitment and involvement. And I think that, as I said earlier, it is now more crucial than ever that we have this report card. We've got this data now. We need to make sure that the people who we're actually relating it back to, not only our community, but also to government. So government understands exactly the sort of data we're getting, what we're doing within our communities, and what our partners are doing to try and change what their practices are. We don't make policy, as was said earlier, but there, if we've got farmers who are using our weather information, and yet we don't have a bomb site here anymore. No Bureau of Meteorology, it's gone. Is that something that, from our perspective, we actually should be starting to target again? Should we be actually really looking at where the policy actually happens, and should we be starting to influence? That's a big question, and a big thing we need to ponder upon, but I actually think it's something perhaps we need to consider going forward. So thank you very much. There's a cake. You can't have a launch without a cake. So for those who love cake, it's outside, and we need a photograph. So please grab your cap, grab your report card. Thank you for coming. Head outside and we'll get a photograph with the cake. Thank you indeed.